everyone. Thank you for joining us here today. I'm Fabiana Bacchini, Executive Director of the Canadian Premature Babies Foundation. CPBF is a charitable organization, and our mission is to support families of premature babies every step of the way. This Premier Chat series is one of the many initiatives we have to bring information for NICU families and healthcare professionals. Here every Friday, we talk with researchers, experts, and parents who share with us their experience and knowledge. Also on our website, canadianpremies.org, parents will find all kinds of resources and support. And today we're going to talk about the limits of viability. The survival rate of babies born prematurely have improved over the last decade. In some hospitals, babies born as early as 21 weeks and 5 days have been discharged to home. However, the debate continues around the world and is still considered a gray zone. There is a lot of data coming out on survival and long-term neurodevelopmental outcomes in very preterm babies. But what should be considered in the decision-making for parents and neonatologists? Today, we are going to hear from two parents of babies born at 22 weeks gestational and their perspectives. Danielle is sharing her daughter's stories to give hope for other parents and to spread awareness of the possibilities of 22-weekers. And Heather will be focusing on her son, born at 22 weeks gestation in 2015, and her fight and advocacy for resuscitation at birth and his journey since. Her son is now 7 years old. And I have here join me live. Let me bring those amazing parents to our studio, Danielle and Heather. Danielle is an educational assistant and she lives in Guelph, Ontario. Her daughter Delilah was born at 22 weeks on the dot in September of 2019 at 500 grams. She spent 6 months in the NICU and overcame many health challenges. Delilah is now 2 years old, corrected. And Heather Hedford is the mother of 3 children, all born too soon. Her first was born at 35 weeks, her second at 22 weeks and 5 days, after fighting for the team to provide resuscitation at delivery, and her third at 29 weeks, just over 6 months later. Since having her children, she has been working hard to raise awareness about advocating for preterm children, especially around informed decision-making and the limits of viability. She has volunteered on the Family Advisory Committee and the Canadian Premature Babies Foundation to bring the parents' voice to the table. She was honored to speak at a neonatal conference 2019, educating medical professionals on the parent perspective of making informed decisions and being in the NICU. Thank you so much, both of you, for joining us here live today. I get goosebumps just to read your bios and the journey that you've been. I know, Heather, you amazed the whole audience of 500 healthcare professionals in 2019. You were the talk of the talk, and everybody was discussing your case and amazed to see your son. So thank you, both of you, for being here today.
Thank you. Having us.
Okay, Heather, we're going to start with you. And to all of you watching live from our YouTube channel, Facebook, or Twitter, please do send your questions, your comments, and you're going to be addressing at the end of their presentations. Heather, I'm going to bring your slides up, and I see you in a little bit.
Hi, so my name is Heather Radford, and I'm the mom of 3. I have 3 preemie babies, so we've had many NICU experiences. My first pregnancy was pretty straightforward. My daughter was born at 35 weeks. My water had broke, but we didn't have any major complications. No reason to suspect that anything would, cause trouble going forward in any future pregnancies. In 2014, I found out I was pregnant. Things had been going well with my pregnancy. My membrane had ruptured at 22 weeks and 3 days. I'd gone into the hospital that I actually work at and had been with some of my coworkers, and I had to find out that my water was broken. At this point, there was nothing that they would do. The hospital that I was at did not provide resuscitation. I had to stay on bed rest, and I was admitted to that hospital at the time. It was been 2 days. I'd been laying in bed. Things had been progressing a little bit. I was having a bit of contractions, but nothing major. At that point, my own obstetrician had come in, and she was on call that day. She had me transferred to Sunnybrook Hospital in Toronto. I had barely arrived at Sunnybrook, and things were getting worse. I was going to have to deliver my baby that very same day at 22 weeks and 5 days gestation. I had started getting sick myself. My heart rate was increasing. I had a white count. It was no longer safe for me to keep the baby inside. I had been told at this point that anything before 23 weeks was not viable. My baby didn't have a chance. I didn't know if it was a boy or a girl. I didn't have very much information about my baby at this point, but I was told that the baby would not survive. We had a very long discussion about outcomes, quality of life, and what we could do going forward given the situation that I was in. The suggestion from the doctor on call that day, as well as the neonatologist, was to turn off all monitors, to turn off anything, and just induce labor, wait for me to deliver the baby, and spend time holding my child until my child passed away. They did not encourage or suggest that we provide resuscitation to the baby when it was born. At the time, I couldn't even imagine that this is happening to me. I knew it happened. I work in a labor and delivery unit as a unit clerk. I'd seen it happen to people all the time, but to be the one sitting in that bed hearing this information was unimaginable. It was an incredibly tough decision. But I had decided that if baby was going to fight, I was going to fight too. I told the doctor at the time that I understand what I was asking of them was not routine and was not common practice. I was asking that they assess the baby and attend the delivery to resuscitate. With hesitation, the team told me about possible quality of life, what we may be facing going forward, potentially prolonging the inevitable, which they felt was that my child would not survive. After a very long discussion and very firm advocacy from myself, I was not willing to tell the team that I didn't want intervention. It's not something I was going to agree to. I said to them that if you were asking what I wanted to fight. If you were telling me that that was not an option, I would accept that and I would move forward in the grieving process. But if you were asking for my opinion and what I wanted to do, I wanted to fight. With hesitation, they finally agreed that they would attend and assess at delivery. Given the state of everything that had been going on with myself and baby over the couple of hours while these discussions occurred, it was decided that I needed to have an emergency C-section right then. If that was the outcome that I wanted resuscitation, we needed to go now. They told me that they would unlikely do anything at delivery, but would attend and assess at the time. I was laying on the C-section table and my baby was born. They rushed the baby away. I wasn't able to see the baby at the time. They came back and told us that the baby had gasped. So they were going to try to resuscitate. Baby was very small. They didn't know if they could do anything. They would let us know a further update. But at this time, they were going to try and resuscitate because baby was trying to gasp for air. I don't really remember having a lot of emotion that night. I don't remember a lot of what I was feeling at the time. I was probably pretty in shock given everything that had occurred. We were taken to recovery room to wait. We waited and waited. The nurse in recovery room asked me to start trying to hand express because in the off chance that baby was able at some point to feed, it would be the best thing for my baby. So I sat in this room in recovery with my partner and my mother at the time, trying to hand express, having no idea what was going on to a baby that was just born. It was a really difficult evening, but we waited. We were finally taken to see him very briefly. He was just over a pound, covered in plastic and tubes. Machines were beeping. They were working to keep him alive, but at least he was fighting, and so was the team. That was my baby boy. He didn't look like a baby I'd ever seen before. His eyes were fused, his ears were flat to his head, and his fingers had not fully separated. His skin was too fragile that we couldn't touch him. All I remember thinking at the time was that this baby needed a name. I felt tremendous pressure to name my baby. Because we didn't know the gender before, we hadn't narrowed down any names. We were still being told that he would not survive beyond about 72 hours and to spend as much time with him as we could. Take pictures, read to him, talk to him, whatever we were comfortable with. All I could focus on was my baby needed a name. I couldn't have my child die without a name. So we decided that little boy was Gage. Over the course of our NICU stay, Gage had many battles, many setbacks, and many fights ahead of him. Initially, they were not able to place a feeding tube, and he had to be transferred to another hospital to have it surgically inserted. He also battled many infections and blood transfusions. He was on a lot of antibiotics. He didn't ever have a PICC line, so that caused even more infection, more changes, more exposure to bacteria, and it was also harder to be able to hold him. He had survived the first 72 hours. We were able to start touching him and laying our hands over top of him. And at this point, he'd beaten all the odds and everything that the doctors had told us would come in those days. At this point, I started finally telling family and friends that I had delivered and what was going on. Prior to this, I was too terrified to lose him that I didn't know what to say. After about 72 hours, we started bonding. I started feeling more attached to him, and we started seeing that there might be some hope going forward. We didn't know what his life would look like or what was to come, but there was at least hope for a future for him. He had many medical challenges he had to overcome while we were in the NICU. He had a PDA that didn't close. He had to have surgery on his heart when he was just over a pound. At the time, he ended up with a chest tube as well. But that decision was probably the hardest decision I made during our entire NICU stay. I didn't know how they were going to be able to perform heart surgery on a baby that was so tiny. But we prepared, we talked to the doctors, we decided it was our best option. Without the surgery, his body was not able to fight hard enough, and he was declining quickly. We had prepped for surgery the next day. We had everything arranged for the other children at home. We were going down to be with him for surgery. At 6 a.m. that morning, the phone rang. He was getting worse, and there was an opening in the OR. They were going to take him for surgery in about an hour and a half, but that wasn't enough time. We lived too far away. There was no way we were going to get all of our other children dropped off and get there in time to see him before he went into surgery. At this point, I still hadn't even held him, and he was about to go into surgery, and I wasn't going to be there for him. We got everybody dropped off and began our race to the hospital, but it was well over an hour away, and it was morning rush hour traffic in Toronto. Nothing was on our side that morning. My mom was at work, and she was already partway into Toronto. I called my mom and begged her to go be with him. She raced to the hospital as well. Partway there, the surgeon called, and he told us that he didn't think that my son would survive surgery, but he knew that if we didn't do surgery, he would pass away. Did I give consent for him to attempt, or did I want to provide or ensure that he had just palliative measures instead? I consented to surgery. If we'd fought this far, I wanted to keep fighting. So there we were, sitting dead stop in rush hour traffic, giving the doctor the go-ahead. This was likely going to be the day my son passed away, and I was stuck in traffic, bawling my eyes out, and there was nothing I could do. I couldn't be there for him. I couldn't say goodbye to him. I called my mom. She had arrived at the hospital, and I asked her to tell him that I loved him for me. I vaguely remember pulling into the parking garage that morning. We had just gotten a phone call that they had actually been delayed, and he was still in his room in the NICU. So 3 weeks post C-section, I ran through the hospital like I've never run before. The team was ready to move him. They were just getting ready to go down the hall when we came running through the doors. I was able to walk him to surgery that morning before he went. Somehow, he pulled through. He came back to his room that day, and from there on forward, things got better. He had defied the odds, and we were able to fight forward. We had lots of other scary days and horrible conversations, but that was probably the worst. He actually started having great improvement as he approached his due date. He was breathing room air. He was starting to be able to breastfeed. And we were approaching that due date with things going in our direction. He was looking really well and strong and healthy. He was growing. He managed to latch and breastfeed well. Our due date came, or our due date approached, sorry, and we were just 2 days shy of my due date. At this point, we had reached all of our milestones that we had talked about in order to go home. I asked the doctor, so why are we still here? I want ideas about what I need to do to move forward to get us home. What are the goals we need to reach? The doctors talked about getting bigger, getting stronger. He had done those things. Breastfeeding, he was doing that. Breathing room air, he was doing that as well. So the doctor looked at me and said, 22-weekers just don't go home before their due dates. And I said, okay, but please tell me what we need to do to go home. And he thought about it, and he came back about 20 minutes later and said, he's ready for discharge. You can go home. I'll get your papers ready. So that day, we went home, the day before his due date. When we got home, things were tough. It was different adjusting to home. We had further surgeries and obstacles ahead of us. However, being home was a nice change of pace. We were able to do things with our other children more, be able to adjust into our new life. Our new life, though, changed again about a year later. Gage had been going to Gage had been going to therapy. We had been working on his strength, working on feeding, working on his milestones going forward. And then a wrench got thrown in the plans. I found out I was pregnant again. So we had another baby on the way, with Gage at home, still not meeting his milestones and needing a lot of care and attention. That baby was born at 29 weeks, just 1 year after Gage was born. We endured an ICU life for a second time. This time was a little bit shorter and had its own scares and its own ups and downs, but it was a much smoother NICU stay. A 29-week baby NICU stay is also terrifying and very difficult, but very different from our NICU stay with our 22-weeker. We now had 2 very young babies at home who needed a lot of care and attention. Both babies were attending therapy. Both babies needed to see doctors, have lots of checkups. I had 2 babies that I was breastfeeding, so I was also tandem feeding and pumping at the same time. But we adjusted. Life with Gage was wonderful. He brought so much joy to our family. He showed us to celebrate all of the little milestones. He helped us to realize the joy in the smallest things, and it changed the perspective on how we viewed life and what was important from the day to day, how quickly things can change, and how much that you need to appreciate everything in the moment. As Gage grew up, he started to get stronger. Meeting his milestones still was not something that Gage was able to do. However, he was growing. He was reaching milestones slower than he should have, but reaching them nonetheless. He had siblings at home who were encouraging him and a younger brother who was catching up to him. Raising these boys took a lot of time and still takes a lot of time in therapy. The boys are the best of friends. They encourage each other, they play with each other, and they go to therapy together. It's definitely not an easy life, but it's definitely one that brings a lot of joy and a lot of triumph and a lot of accomplishment. Gage is just turned 7. He went to daycare and then he has entered school. Obviously, with the pandemic, things have been a little different in school for him, but he is doing quite well. He still has challenges. He still has struggles. Gage has low vision, but he's learning Braille. He has mild CP. We do horse therapy. We do skiing lessons. We do physiotherapy. He also has an autism diagnosis. He pretends or prefers to play by himself than with his brothers or his siblings, but we're working on his social interaction, and having so many siblings at home has encouraged him and helped him find ways to cope with overwhelming situations and stimulus. He is the happiest little boy I have ever met, even happier than his siblings. He is very compliant. He is very much about sharing, and he loves facts. Yes, some of that is from his autism, but the memory on him is absolutely amazing. And he will talk to you, have conversations with you about everything that he is interested in. Gage is now 7. He is doing absolutely amazing. I'm sure that his life ahead of him is going to have many challenges. Prematurity is for life, but he brings so much joy to us. And I've been able to use his story to talk to others about informed decision. And when you're giving families and parents all of this information about what may come from having a baby that early, they don't often tell you about all the joy and all of the wonderful moments and experiences you will have with that child, or all of the memories that you will make, and the perspective that you will have on life and how it changes when you have a child that may have disabilities, but also fights every day to overcome the odds and to do better and to be stronger. None of that is discussed with the parents or with the families when you're having conversations about viability and whether resuscitation is the best choice for your family. I strongly believe that everybody should be fully informed before making the decision, and that everybody has their own decision to make based on their family and their wishes. But before you make that decision, you need to know both sides of the story, not just the outcomes or the odds, because those don't define who a person is. Thanks for joining us today, and I'll pass it over to Danielle now.
Oh, Heather, thank you. I know Danielle was also holding her tears. I can see her in the background. I heard your story before, but every time it really touches my heart. And I really admire your strength and all the advocacy that you do for our family. So it's beautiful. So I'm going to bring Danielle now. We are going to have time for Q&A at the end. So if you are watching us live and you want to send your questions, your comments, your insights, or if you are a healthcare professional, what kind of conversations you have with your families, we would love to hear from you. So Danielle, I have here your slides, so you can take over the floor, and we'll do the Q&A right after.
Awesome, thank you. So Delilah was born at 22 and 0. We call her B because aerodynamically, the bumblebee shouldn't be able to fly, but the bumblebee doesn't know that and goes on flying anyway. And that was said by Mary Kay Ash. So at 21 and 4 weeks pregnant, I lost my mucus plug without any warning. I had no idea what was happening. This was my first pregnancy. I was so scared. The hospital, when I had got there, they checked me out, and they had gone and called another level 3 hospital. And when they had come back, they told me to go home and have a miscarriage and return once I had. I refused. I said that I was staying in the hospital, that I was not leaving, that I was going to fight for my baby. And I stayed in the hospital with my feet above my head to hopefully help gravity keep her in. I was transferred to a level 3 hospital at 21 and 6. Once I arrived at the level 3 hospital, we first met with the anesthesiologist, and then the neonatologist came into the room. She explained to us that if our baby survived the birth, she would have less than a 10% chance of survival. She said that we should allow our daughter to pass peacefully. Again, we refused to give up on Delilah. I asked that all medical intervention be used. And then the OBG came into the room, and he did an ultrasound and explained my birthing options. Because I had been with my feet above my head for 4 days, I was on blood thinners. If the safest option for Delilah's birth was to have a C-section. But because I had been on blood thinners, it was a high risk for my life. And for Delilah's life, it was higher risk to deliver naturally. We chose to deliver her naturally, and she was born in the sac at 22 and 0. So the trauma that I experienced during birth, during the intake and the assessment at the level 3 hospital, we found that we were completely bombarded with numerous doctors, nurses, and information. And we were asked to make life-changing decisions in a matter of minutes. And I had to make a decision about putting my child's life at risk or my own life at risk. We found it extremely difficult to process all of this information, and we were there very, very thankful that my mom was there to be able to absorb the information and what was going on and be able to relate to us multiple times to be able to make an informed decision. So my hope is that one day that we'll have early intervention, a service to advocate, navigate, and to educate parents on preterm labor and babies. A preterm baby happens to 1 in 10 babies, making being a premature parent more common than perceived. The service should be available to families at 20 weeks gestation to provide information on preterm labor, signs and symptoms, what high-risk pregnancy means, and what having a micropreemie is versus having a premature baby, and more. The service should be present for hospital intake meetings, procedures, and appointments to relay information multiple times. This should allow parents to process and make an educated decision for themselves and their baby. The service should advocate for parents' rights, decisions, needs, wants, wishes, and to the medical team. And this service would prevent so much trauma for other parents. So Delilah was born So I ruptured at 21 and 6 at 10 p.m. The doctors were not willing to medically intervene until she was 22 weeks. They would not give Delilah steroids until midnight, but she did receive 2 rounds. She was born breech in the sac. She was 28 centimeters long and weighed what they think was 500 grams. They weren't able to get Delilah's weight before they were able to intubate and put in the lines. So something I learned about myself was that I learned that being in the NICU, I am my child's best advocate. You know your baby the best. Try to be there for rounds, question the doctors and nurses. You are your child's voice. We had 3 different meetings with Delilah's doctors, and their recommendation was to terminate her support. We believed in the strength of our daughter, and we continued for medical intervention. Delilah had a long journey with her lungs. She was intubated for 10 weeks. She self-extubated twice, which was the scariest moment of my life. She was on CPAP for 10 weeks, high flow for 2 weeks, and was in room air. One of the scariest moments of having Delilah was my father-in-law had passed away 2 weeks after Delilah was born, and my husband was helping his family plan the funeral. The doctors had approached me and said that they didn't think that Delilah was going to make it and that we needed to start making arrangements for her. I sat there with my grandmother and I planned her funeral. I planned her baptism. We got photos taken. It was the scariest moment of my life. And as the priest was setting up for her baptism, she self-extubated. And I watched the monitors flatline. I watched every, I'm sure, nurse and doctor run into the room to try and reintubate her. And it was horrifying. I stood there screaming, "Help my baby." And the priest at the time looked over at me and was like, "Don't worry, we'll baptize her before she goes." And it was the scariest. Well, all of our family was sitting in a waiting room to come in for her baptism, and they had no idea what was going on at her bedside. When she self-extubated, they realized that there was mucus at the bottom of her tube and that she had an infection. Had Delilah not self-extubated, they would have never caught the infection. She saved herself. She is truly a fighter. Some of her other medical challenges was that she had a grade 2 brain bleed. She received 2 courses of DART. She received nitric oxide, budesonide. She had a small PDA valve. She had a clot in her liver. She had kidney failure, and because she was under, I think it was 3 pounds, they told us basically that it's a wait and see because we can't perform dialysis because of how small she was. She had hypertension, she had a skin infection, she lost the fingertips on her left hand due to a clot in her line. She had ROP stage 3 advanced that was treated, and she had a bladder infection. So our beliefs, we always left our stress at the door. We figured that Delilah had enough going on in her life that she only needed to feel our love and support. So my husband and I kind of pulled ourselves together, wiped our tears at the door, and went and sat at her bedside. We also said that we would support her unconditionally. If that meant a long fight, that we would stand by her side and fight with her. If it meant the alternative, that we would also support her hand and hold her hand during that. Something my family really believes in is making every single holiday as special as possible, because we are so grateful for our miracle. So as you can see in some of the pictures, we got Delilah a dress from Build-A-Bear for her Christmas photos. I also sewed some pajamas together for her during our NICU stay, and we continue to make every holiday extra special for her. Something that I found really helpful in the NICU was a book called Preemie Care. I read it. It helped me understand a lot more what was going on and what I could do. Something that helped me when I got home from the NICU was creating a shadow box of all the memories and the things that we overcame during our hospital stay, and a scrapbook. So Delilah was discharged after 182 days. She was discharged 2 weeks after the first COVID lockdown. During our stay during the lockdown, it was only one parent allowed in the hospital at a time. I felt that this was so isolating. The NICU stay is already isolating. COVID just amplifies that. Once we were home, we kind of continued to stay isolated because of COVID. Surviving the NICU. So things I found helpful was my husband. He was absolutely my rock. He always made sure that I had a safe space to write out my emotions, and always was able to see the light at the end of the tunnel. His famous quote is, "Only one of us is allowed to be sad at a time," meaning that one of us was allowed to cry and the other person had to hold their hand and support them through it. And I am so grateful for that. Our nurses, having consistency and having our nurses made it a little bit easier to go home at night. It helped us know that we had somebody there who loved Delilah just as much as we did or do. It made it a little easier. Having our family helped us fundraise to financially survive, because there is a huge financial burden. We were away from our home and stayed in a Ronald McDonald House for 6 months. It was expensive. Another thing that really helped me is my NICU moms. So I know it's a little difficult right now because of COVID, but what helped keep me sane was other NICU moms. They understood like nobody else did. My NICU wife, Martina, she is my person. Martina and I spend almost all of our spare time together. We still talk on a daily basis. The bond we have is unbreakable. The only thing that I miss at night is meeting in the Ronald McDonald kitchen for our hot chocolate and our daily debrief. We were often joined by other moms, and I have such an incredible bond with them as well. And like I said, they really understand the struggle, and it made it so much easier. So Delilah is 2 years actual and will be 2 years corrected on January 28th. Delilah has met all of her developmental milestones and will be getting glasses soon. She is nearsighted. She loves outdoors, animals, cuddling. She is our miracle. Thank you so much for listening to my presentation.
Wow, Danielle, thank you so much for sharing your story. And Heather, thank you so much, both of you, for sharing the good, the bad, the hard, the heartbreaking, and the hope, because I think this is all about hope and how can you support other parents coming after you. And Danielle, you spoke so beautifully about the peer support, because this is it's so we know the importance of peer support and talking to people who actually being there and understanding this journey. Wow, I don't even know where to start, because it's sometimes it's overwhelming. Even though I had a 26-weeker, your stories touch my heart as if it was my own. I bring so many memories back, but I want to open with a comment from Tracy. I don't know if it's from one of you. Hardest moment of my life, but so glad I was there for you and could process the multitudes of information that came at you. Wow. Tracy, thank you so much for joining us and for, it is so important to have that kind of support. And when you think about what is happening in ICUs now, that kind of support is not available because of COVID. The families are pretty much alone making those very difficult decisions in those moments that, you're never going to forget. So I want to talk to both of you a little bit about that moment on that conversation, because this is a conversation that it happens for all of us preemie parents, no matter which gestational week you're going to deliver. But I feel that is very challenging when you are on that, what they call the gray zone for the medical system. So, and Danielle, you did make some suggestions on how those conversations should happen, but I want to explore a little bit more with you, both of you, about those conversations on that moment when you have to make a decision and there's not a lot of time to make those life-changing decisions. Heather, start with you.
I found it very difficult because the information that they were throwing at us was very medical. It was very overwhelming, and it was very negative. So all of the information talked about how hard it was going to be, the outcomes and the odds that were against us, the quality of life that was going to be sacrificed. And although those are very important facts and information to know when you make a decision, part of an informed decision is knowing about the good that comes with it too, and about all of the information, not just the negative or one side or just the medical, because there's a lot more that goes into those decisions than just the stats.
Absolutely. Danielle?
So for me, the stats were you have less than a 10% chance of survival. She's going to likely have many disabilities, many challenges. What is the quality of life going to be for her? There was no part of that conversation that was positive. Nothing. There was no, we've seen this happen before. This is the potential. It was the worst case scenario. There was no positivity. There was no hope in that conversation at all. It was extremely traumatic. And I went from, okay, you're going to be here for a few days, to you've now ruptured, you're going to deliver now. And I had a matter of an hour to make a decision on my daughter's life. It was beyond words that I can express on how traumatic that meeting was. And like I've had to go and sit in that hospital room again, and I can tell you the flashbacks were awful. It was absolutely horrible being in that room, because making that decision, how do you make a decision about your baby's life in an hour? It's impossible.
Absolutely. And I remember my husband saying to me, do not listen to them. Do not listen to them. Just close your ears. Do not listen to what they're saying, because it was so scary. And I absolutely remember that. But I want to touch base a little bit on the disability piece, because my son has quadriplegic cerebral palsy because of his prematurity. And we have these conversations all the time with researchers who are in this field. I feel there is a lot of stigma around disability. Obviously, we all know that in our society. Do you think those conversations that happen when we are in labor, about to deliver a preterm baby, because of this stigma around disability?
Absolutely,
Yeah.
I do.
I also feel like for me, they were throwing all of these terms at me about quality of life and disabilities and challenges. But there's no guarantees. Even if I went full term, my child could have challenges. My child could have things that happen later in life. There was never going to be a guarantee for quality of life or outcomes. And I felt that I was ready to stand by my child and fight for them, whatever that may look like. And just because of their gestation was not a reason to change my view on parenting and quality of life going forward. I would do the same if my baby was born full term and there were complications. But the way that they phrase those conversations at 22 weeks is very different than how they phrase those conversations at a later gestation or a baby that's close to term, that may still have challenges and disabilities ahead of them.
Heather, were the conversations different with your 3 preterm babies? Because you had a late preterm, you had a 29
Absolutely.
weeker.
Yeah. So with my 35 weeker, there was no conversation. It was, you're going to deliver early. We'll see what happens. Things will be fine. With my 22 weeker, although they gave me a choice, it really wasn't a choice. And I said that to the doctor. I said, you keep asking me, but then you don't agree and you tell me that it's not what I should do. So if you're actually asking, then this is my answer, or tell me that you're not going to intervene. Because
So it wasn't really a shared decision. It was more like,
yeah,
you felt that the views were imposed upon you what we should do.
yeah, you weren't, even though they were phrasing it as a question, they weren't really asking. And then with my 29-week baby, we had a conversation about what the potential quality of life or outcomes could be, but it was more positive, and it was more about that there would be support and this is the journey that it would look like going forward, rather than the negative that my 22-week baby had.
Right. So I'm going to share here on the chat, Dr. Gregory Moore. He's from CHIO in Ottawa. He has a great tool for clinicians for shared decision making. It's a great tool to really have a proper conversation with parents, and how to ask parents about their values, their traditions, their views, their religion. There's a lot of elements when you're making that decision at that time. So Danielle, for you, what was that when you look back now? And we know we always think about those conversations, and you see your daughter now. So how do you feel?
So for me, I said to the doctors multiple times, I'm an EA. This is what I do for a living. I have worked with children with disabilities for 5 years at that point. I said to them, I have no problem supporting my daughter. If anything, I am going to be one of the best homes for her to have any sort of complication, because I know how to support her. I'm educated on this. I have so many resources for her. And that didn't matter. It didn't stop them from having the conversation to me about her quality of life. And it didn't stop them from asking us to terminate support. So for us, it was just a matter of pushing our rights for our daughter. And I was aware that a meeting had happened prior to my delivery where the doctors, without my consent, had a conversation on whether to intervene with her or not. And it was a heartbreaking thing, because I look at Delilah today and she's amazing. She is a little delayed on her speech, but she's walking, she's talking, she's running, she's playing, she's sharing toys with other kids. She is incredible. She loves coloring. She is insanely happy. She lights up the room when she walks in. She is a miracle, really. And I couldn't imagine my life had we listened to what the doctors were saying. I really couldn't. She's just so incredibly smart and just absolutely amazing and so loved. And the doctors have said to me today that they're like, wow, she is amazing. She is a miracle. Look at her go. And there is no stopping Delilah when she has made up her mind. Let me tell you, she is a very independent, strong little girl.
That is wonderful. And there's so many comments coming, and I'm going to share this one. Your loved ones are so incredibly lucky to have such strong and wonderful women in their lives. And I could not agree more, because this is a lot of, we know it's a lot of work with very little support from the community, but it takes a village to raise those little ones. And the joy that they bring to our lives is just incredible. So I do want to share, actually, your mom made another comment, Danielle. Nothing but negative information was given on intake at the hospital while you are in the scariest moments of your life. So overwhelming. Absolutely. A few years ago, I was at a conference, and there was a doctor from Sweden presenting here in Canada. And back 4 or 5 years ago, he said in Sweden, they were resuscitating 100% of babies born at 22 weeks. And their whole room was quiet, because there's a lot of conversation, all kind of support in system, all kinds of supports there in the system for families of 22 weekers. Obviously, Sweden has a very different health care than we have here. They have 2 years of parental leave. It's different than Canada. So I'm asking both of you now, what kinds of support have you found in the community, and are they enough?
Well, when I had my son back in 2015, there were no other surviving 22 weekers in 2014 or 2015. So I didn't have much support in that area, because there really wasn't many out there. And the few that had survived before him were very few and far between. So I feel like a lot of my advocacy is helping to raise awareness for those families that are sort of the outliers. It breaks my heart that there are more 22 weekers around, because I wish nobody would ever have to go through that. But it's also really touching for me to see more babies and more families fighting for intervention and doing well coming up behind us. And I want to continue to fight for those families and show them that this is an option if it's something that they want to have a conversation about. I find that we are getting more support going forward, but it's still very hard to find. Parent groups are helpful. Reaching out and finding other families who've been in the NICU or been in that sort of gray area is also very helpful. I didn't have a lot of it at the time, but there were more people that I could reach out to as I had my 29-week baby, and a lot of families who have come up behind me that I've been able to speak to. So I hope that that continues going forward.
Absolutely. Danielle?
I found that once we got discharged because of COVID, there was a huge lack of support. A lot of it was virtual. Everything has been virtual for us. We haven't seen an OT or a PT in person in a year. I recently got a phone call from the city of Guelph being like, hey, we heard you had a baby, and what supports could we help you with? And I was like, she's 2. So I don't know, maybe getting her to eat things other than French fries, that would help. Like, there was a huge lack of support coming home because of COVID. Everything was shut down. We basically went home and we're like, okay, we're going to stay in our bubble. Please don't come near my house. You can look at us through the window. And that was the support we had. We had Kids Ability come into our home just for helping her with her oral feeding. But she was discharged months ago from Kids Ability. I think they only followed us for like 3 months. And then they were like, well, she's swallowing, she's moving, she's doing everything she should. So COVID's a huge problem. So we'll see you later if you need us.
Absolutely. I want to bring one beautiful question here from Catherine. What was your most memorable moment of triumph being home from the NICU? Let's start with you, Danielle. Thank you, Catherine, for joining us.
For me, it was being able to say, she hasn't been diagnosed with anything. She has shown no signs of disabilities so far. And it was like, you were wrong. You don't know 100%. Look at her. She is absolutely incredible. And you were wrong. It was that moment of, look at this girl shine. You were wrong. You're not always right. Please admit it and stop forcing parents into making a decision they shouldn't have to.
Okay, Heather?
For me personally, my sort of most memorable moment as a parent was standing at a conference in front of hundreds of medical professionals beside the neonatologist who told me my son would never survive and I should shut off all interventions and monitors. And he stood beside me while I presented about how Gage is doing now and how far he's come, and just having him talk to how much things have changed and how much his view on the parent perspective has changed, and being able to stand beside him and present together was huge for me. My biggest moment or memorable moment for my son would be when he went off to school with his siblings. He started JK at school. He walked in with his siblings on his first day of school, so proud to be there. And he really has flourished in school, and he has done amazing with reading and writing and all of these skills that they said were sort of higher level that he wouldn't be able to grasp. And he's killing it. He's rocking school and he's loving every moment of it. So seeing him be proud of himself is sort of, for him, what makes me most proud.
Oh, that is amazing. So before you wrap it up, I would like you both to leave a message for perhaps healthcare professionals who are watching us here today, or other parents of preemies who are hearing us today. Your last thoughts and comments.
Danielle, you want to go first, or?
Yeah. These babies aren't just numbers. They have personalities. They have strengths that you don't know. So take it case by case and really listen to the parents, listen to how strong they are, listen to how they are willing to fight for these babies, because that makes all of the difference. The will to fight and it's 10% doesn't matter to me. What matters to me is my baby. And to take away from that parents are willing to fight for their babies and 10% doesn't matter.
Oh, thank you, Heather.
Everything you've said. My child's not the statistic. My child is their own person, and our journey is our journey, even if that doesn't look like the typical journey. If this is a journey we want to take, then stand behind us and support us going forward.
Oh, that is beautiful. I really want to thank both of you for being here today, sharing your stories. I know sometimes it's very hard to relive the NICU experience and those memories. Sometimes it's very triggering. So I'm very grateful that you took the time, because as Danielle said, it is hope for others coming after us. Is a hope that healthcare professionals are listening to us and really think about those conversations that we have with families. Those are the conversations that stick with us for the rest of our lives. And how can we make this a shared decision making, but not a healthcare system decision, what you think is better for our families, but really include us, our values, our beliefs, our religion, faith, and whatever that is important for that family to be taken into consideration. So, but thank you, both of you. I hope I see you both again soon here. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
And to all of you watching us live today on YouTube, Facebook, or Twitter, thank you so much for joining us here today. The video of today's session and all the videos from our live sessions are available on the CPBF website. And I'm going to share here the link, the CanadianPreemies.org. We are a charitable organization, and we believe that through support and education, we can empower families, ensure they are ready to care for their babies. Visit our website, consider making a donation. Together, we can create a brighter future for all our families. And I see you again next Friday, 1 p.m. Eastern Time. Thank you and stay well.